Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we continue our 32-part 2021 team previews. Today's team, the Nashville Predators. Thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Make sure you check out our website down below, i80sports.com, for all of our NHL team previews. And if you're joining us here on YouTube, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe for all of our team previews. We are wrapping up the Central Division, and we're all wrapped up with the Pacific Division. So we're moving on to the Atlantic and the Metropolitan over these next few weeks. So make sure that you check out all of our previous videos. And if you're a fan of any teams in the Atlantic or Metropolitan, your team is coming up. Join us along the ride for more. And as usual, make sure you follow us down below on Twitter at I80_SportsNHL. And if you're currently following on Twitter, thank you guys so much, because we greatly value all of your support, because without you guys, we can't do this on a weekly basis. I'm Brian. He's Tom. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing well. And here we are to preview the Nashville Predators, a team that kind of shocked people a little bit last year by making playoffs, and a team maybe whose better days are behind them, but maybe not, depending on if you can catch lightning in a bottle or not. And that does happen every now and then.
Yeah, this is true. It did surprise me that Nashville did find their way to the playoffs. It was an early exit, but this is definitely a different team coming into this year, and we will certainly be talking about that in just a few short moments. But like I said before, we are wrapping up the Central Division here, so why not wrap up with the Nashville Predators? So here we go. First and foremost, as we always do, we have to talk about some 2020 and 2021 team facts, what was Nashville's record last year? Well, it was 31-23-2, which was good for 64 points, and they finished fourth in the NHL Central Division last year. Pretty surprising there. Power play and penalty kill stats, somewhat underwhelming, unfortunately. I mean, to be honest, this is a John Hines head-coached team, so they are going to be underwhelming stats. So what were they? On the power play, they were below league average, sitting at about 17.61% on the power play, and league average is about 19%, so they were about 2 cents shy of league average. On the penalty kill, they were a little bit further behind, sitting at 75.58% on the penalty kill, and league average there is around 80%. So a little rough there for the Nashville Predators. They look to hopefully improve those numbers this year. Leading scorers as of last year, they're hoping to improve in this category too. Their leading scorer was their captain and star defenseman, Roman Josi, with 33 points. So pretty big difference from some of the other Central Division teams that we've been covering, with guys that have scored about 40 points, 50 points, 60 points. Roman Josi is the highest leading scorer on the Nashville Predators this past year with 33 points. Next was Philip Forsberg with 32 points. And coming up in third is former Nashville Predator Cale Jarnkrok with 28 points. Next, we got to talk about some key additions and subtractions here, some interesting additions to say the least. You had David Riddick, Philip Myers, Cody Glass, and Matt Luff. And subtractions, you had some pretty large subtractions here. The retirement of Pekka Rinne, the trade of Ryan Ellis, as well as Victor Arvidsson, and also losing the likes of Eric Gabranson, Eric Howla, and Brad Richardson to free agency, and finally losing Cale Jarnkrok to the expansion draft. So Cale Jarnkrok is now in Seattle. So some pretty interesting names coming in, really interesting names going out for the Nashville Predators. Next, we got to talk about some X Factors. And no, we're not talking about NHL 22 X Factors. Thanks a lot there, EA Sports. I almost said ESPN, not sure why. But X Factors here, we are talking about guys on this team that are going to contribute in a big way to Nashville's success. So, Tom, as per usual, I've definitely done enough talking here. So who in your mind are some X Factors on the Nashville Predators?
Believe it or not, you still have some talent here in the top six in the form of guys like Philip Forsberg, Ryan Johansson, and Matt Duchene. If they can get top-notch performances out of each, this team could turn some heads. I know it sounds like a broken record here with this Central Division, but right now I only think that first place and eighth place are like givens in this division right now. Second through seventh are wide open. So if Nashville can go on a run and say a team like Chicago falters, Nashville could be in the playoffs. Obviously, the other way around. A team like Minnesota could go on a run. A team like St. Louis could falter. I really think that the middle 6 spots in this division are wide open to take. So if they can get good performances out of these guys and they can turn back the clock a little bit, you never know. You never know.
I agree. To me, I think the biggest X factor for the Nashville Predators is Roman Josi. And Josi has been one of the best defensemen in the NHL, in the world, for a few years now, with one Norris Trophy in his trophy case. And he could make a case for the Norris this year, but if Nashville has a down year, that's going to be a tough case. Plus, with Josi likely captaining Team Switzerland in the Winter Olympics, I just really worry about Roman Josi this year. Is he going to burn out towards the end because of the workload this year? I mean, hopefully not. But the top 6 forwards looks good on paper, but they need to produce. Forsberg is the main guy I'm looking at here. When he's on the ice, Nashville is a different team, but Forsberg was sidelined for a good chunk of last year due to injury. So Philip Forsberg staying on the ice is going to be pivotal to this team's success. As Tom pointed out before, this team does have talent in their top 6. They've got Philip Forsberg. They've got Ryan Johansson. They've got a young Eli Tolvanen if he can produce. Mikael Granlund, Matt Duchene, Luke Kunin, who they acquired not too long ago. You know, they're not short on talent. It's more so just putting the pieces together. And that's where I think John Hines, in this case, where we really haven't mentioned coaching as being an X factor, I think John Hines' performance as a head coach is really going to be under a microscope this year for the Nashville Predators in terms of putting those pieces together and navigating the waters for Nashville back towards the playoffs again. And it's going to be an uphill climb. But in the Central Division that has a couple weaker teams, maybe Nashville can do something with that. Next, we're going to talk about some breakout candidates, guys who haven't quite had a big year yet. We have a couple of candidates here on the Nashville Predators, actually. And Tom, who's somebody that could be a breakout candidate for the Nashville Predators?
Well, I'm actually going with Cody Glass here, and he was a highly touted prospect in that 2017 draft. He went to Vegas, and I believe everybody's thought process back then was, well, Vegas is an expansion team. This kid's a very good center who could work his way to be a number 1 point per game guy in a few years, and he's going to have all the opportunities he wants in Vegas because they're going to be, an up-and-coming team. Well, we obviously know what happened in Vegas. Vegas turned into a finalist in their first year. They've been a contender ever since. And I just felt like because of that, when Vegas' mind's being on going after the Stanley Cup because they've had such good years instead of, building a team from scratch because they had such bad years, he never really got his shot there. He's in Nashville now. He's projected to start in that third line spot. And hopefully this will give him some more minutes. Hopefully he'll be in the lineup a little more here in Nashville. Like I said, Nashville is not a cup contender like Vegas was. So you got to hope they're going to give Cody Glass enough playing time to figure himself out there. But I'm going with him.
I think Cody Glass is the popular choice here, and I do agree. And actually, it's a person that I probably would highlight usually in this place. But there's somebody else in that top 6 who is also very young and has been a prospect that has been talked about in Nashville for a while, and that's Eli Tolvanen. And I'm going with Eli Tolvanen here just simply because I just want him to finally make a name for himself. There are some people that are, associating Eli Tolvanen with potentially being a bust, and I think that's unfair to say. I think it's still, the jury's still out. He needs to have a good year this year to, hush the naysayers. He has all of the potential. But with only 22 points in 40 games, I just feel like there's still untapped potential to his game. And I think maybe this year could be the year, but we got to wait until the games are played. And we can't just go by an NHL 21 or NHL 22 rating and potential to really see what he can finally do. He's got to put it all together on the ice. Now, as we always do once we get to this point, it's time that we look at the potential opening night lineup for the Nashville Predators, which it has to be said right now, it is the beginning of September. We've got quite a bit of time until we get to the beginning of October. A lot of things could change. We still have training camp coming up, so things could obviously change. So, of course, take the potential opening night lineup with a big grain of salt. So, it's time to look at what we think the potential opening night lineup could look like once we get to October. So, as usual, we are starting with forward line 1 as normal, which, whoops, might want to actually turn off the display here as I normally do. Oops. But, hey, mistakes happen. We roll with it. So, starting first with forward line 1, as we always do, going from left wing to center to right wing, we've got Philip Forsberg, Ryan Johansson, and Eli Tolvanen. Next, to forward line 2, Mikael Granlund, Matt Duchene, and Luke Kunin. Then moving on to forward line 3, we've got Nick Cousins, Cody Glass, and Philip Tomasino. And then lastly, on the fourth line, Yakov Trenin, Colton Sissons, and Matthew Oliver. So, moving on to the first line of defense, Roman Josi and Philip Myers. On to the second line of defense, we've got Matthias Ekholm and Alexander Carrier. And the third line of defense, Mark Borowiecki and Dante Fabro. Lastly, pulling up the rear, the goaltending, we've got goalie 1A and goalie 1B. And the only reason why I'm doing this, and I know I might catch heat from Nashville fans for this, is just simply because, and controversial thought here, I don't know how highly I think of goalie 1A just yet, and I want him to prove me wrong. So goalie 1A, Yu Saros, and goalie 1B, David Rittich. So, pretty interesting lineup on paper here for the Nashville Predators. But as we always do, we got to talk about some variables because things could change between now and October. Things could change between October to the Olympic break. Things could change after the trade deadline. So, Tom, in your mind, what are some things that could change and evolve with Nashville's lineup over the course of this year?
Well, it's really hard for me with these variables here. I guess the three guys I mentioned above, along with Cody Glass, I guess they're X factors, and Glass is a breakout candidate, but all four of these guys are variables as well. If these three guys and guys like Johansson, Forsberg, and Duchene can't right the ship, will they be able to gouge up enough interest to be moved for assets so this team can start a rebuild? Will contending teams want to go out and grab one of these guys? Johansson and Duchene come to mind, especially because the team we'll talk about later in the Boston Bruins may be looking for a center for that second line if they can fit it in with their cap. You never know. If they're playing well, if they're having their worst seasons ever, I don't think anybody's going to come knocking at Nashville's door looking for any of them. If three of those guys are moved, or if one or two of the guys are moved, especially if it's Johansson or Duchene, one of the two are moved, then you can slot Cody Glass into that first or second line center ice position. But here's the other problem. What if you give Glass those minutes and he still doesn't produce? He's given the minutes and he still doesn't live up to the player he becomes. Then what do? Then you're stuck with the Cody Glass everyone was afraid of. You're kind of stuck with somewhat of a bust. Another thing that came to mind is I know you have UC Saros and David Rittich and net here. But just for you know what and giggles, I won't say it here, but I mean, I'm sure you guys can figure the analogy out. Come on, you're all smart. Put it in your head. Will they maybe try to bring over Yaroslav Askarov this year? Will they try to give him a cup of coffee? You know, if his season ends early in the KHL and he just decides, hell, I want to go over. I want to play in the NHL now. Will they bring him over and give him some looks towards the end of the season, provided they're out of the playoffs? Or maybe provided they are fighting for a playoff spot and just say, you know what? Maybe this guy will give us a jolt of energy. So just a couple of things that were on my mind with this Nashville Predators team.
A lot of valid points there, Tom. And I do got to say that the Nashville Predators are certainly biding time at the moment until top prospect and top goaltending prospect Yaroslav Askarov is ready to come stateside. And who knows, maybe he'll be ready post Olympics if he somehow squeaks into that Russian lineup. I don't think it really happens. But that being said, who knows? Maybe they're just waiting for post Olympics. But that being said, I want to kind of circle back to my Saros point, because you look on paper of this past year with 35 starts, he was 21-11 with a .927 save percentage and a 2.28 goals against. That is certainly a great year for a goaltender. Do not get me wrong. He did very, very well. But I also want to look at the year prior where he was a little exposed. Yes, he was a year younger, but in 34 starts, a 914 save percentage, a 2.70 goals against average. Now, here's the thing. Here's the reason why I am a little bit weary right now of Saros. It's simply because he hasn't had to do it without the safety net of Pekka Rinne. And now he's, I think, the only game in town. David Rittich is certainly a perfectly fine backup. But he is not like having Pekka Rinne as your backup. And Pekka Rinne, who is potentially a future Hall of Famer. David Rittich isn't that. And Saros is going to have to show that this past year was not necessarily an anomaly. And truth be told, I don't think it necessarily was. You go back to his age 22 season in 2017-2018, he put up similar numbers to this year. He put up a 925 save percentage and a 2.45 goals against in 23 starts in that year. So I think he could be ready for the heavy workload. Saros could end up starting well over 40 games this year. I honestly think he's set to start around 50 to 55 games. And I'll be interested to see what his numbers look like, to be honest. And I am going to be interested to see what happens without the Pekka Rinne safety net. Other factors in my mind are, can the top six stay healthy? Because last year was a rough year last year for that top six. And will Eli Tolvanen finally live up to his expectations, especially playing in that top six with potentially Philip Forsberg and Ryan Johansson? I really hope he does. I'm pulling for him too. But are you going to have some thoughts of what to do with this roster if he doesn't break out this year? We'll just have to see for Nashville. Now, rounding out our show as usual, we got to move on to our question of the day, which our question of the day is the same as always. Where do the Nashville Predators finish this year in the Central Division? Tom, in your mind, where do they finish in the Central Division?
Well, as I said before, the division is wide open with the exception of maybe first place and last place. But to tell you the truth, Chicago, St. Louis, and Minnesota all seem to be a little bit better set up than Nashville is. So unfortunately here, and sorry Nashville fans, I got to go with 7th place right now. And until I see something different, I got to go with 7th place.
Yeah, it's tough. This team is in a bit of cap trouble and is still desperately awaiting the arrival of top goaltending prospect Yaroslav Askarov, as we talked about in our variables section. They're not a bad team. You look on paper, this is not a bad team. This is a team that finished in 4th last year. But to be honest, I just think the competition is just that much better this year, where I think a lot of teams improved this year. I think Nashville kind of just stayed the same and just kind of filled in the gaps around everything. Sure, Cody Glass is a very interesting player that you're adding to that top 9 who could be a major factor in this year's lineup. But maybe there's a reason why Vegas decided to move on from him rather quickly. And maybe that becomes apparent this year. We'll just have to see. But in my mind, I honestly think that Nashville finishes 7th this year. I just like some teams a little bit more than Nashville this year. There are other teams that I think excite me more than Nashville this year. Is it going to surprise me if Nashville might finish higher than this? No, it's not going to surprise me in the least, especially if this team stays healthy and if Saros plays well in net. I think if those two things happen, this could be a very different Nashville team than what we're talking about right now. We're just personally a little bit more excited about other teams and I might have a little bit of my own personal bias when it comes to being a New Jersey Devil fan. I have learned over the years not to heavily trust John Hines-led teams. And I want him to break that stigma. I have nothing against the guy. I think he is a great coach for a young team, but I'll be interested to see how this team runs under John Hines this year. I really will. But as always, guys, what do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree with our assessment? The only way you can let us know is letting us know in the comment section down below. Make sure you sound off down below in the comment section. And hey, if you're already doing that, drop a like and subscribe for all of our team previews coming up, because hey, you might not necessarily be a Nashville Predators fan or a fan of any teams in the Central Division and the Pacific Division. But we're moving on to the Atlantic Division next, where we've got some really exciting teams to talk about. I also might learn how to speak English at that point. That'll really be interesting. I've been reading a dictionary. It's great. It's an amazing book. But we want you guys to be able to check that out along with us. And the only way you can do so is by subscribing. And if you want to check out other content of ours, make sure you check out our website down below, i80sports.com, where not only can you find all of our NHL content and our team previews, but the NFL season has just begun. You can also check out our NFL coverage, our NCAA football coverage, our MLS coverage, and our NBA coverage there as well. Make sure you give them some love as well, especially as all those seasons have either just begun or are just getting ready to begin. And make sure you follow us on Twitter down below at i80_sportsNHL. And if you're already following already, thank you guys so much, because we greatly value all of your support. But Tom, with that, I think it's time that we wave goodbye to the Central Division and time to move on to the Atlantic Division. I'm Brian. He's Tom. This has been our Nashville Predators 2021-2022 team preview.